Hi and welcome to the Online Academy of Irish Music. My name is Steph Jeremiah and I'm here today to take you through a tutorial for the complete beginner for traditional Irish flute. So we're going to start with 6 introductory lessons. So this is the first of them, and we're going to start at the very start. So first of all, we have the Irish traditional flute. So the Irish flute is it's a very simple system flute, meaning we don't have all the keys that you would have on, say, a classical flute. Now my flute comes from a guy called Mike Grinter, and it's fully keyed. You can see I have all the keys. So for most of you, I'm assuming a lot of you at home will probably be playing a keyless flute, which is essentially the same as mine, and it's perfectly fine for what we need to do. So we're going to start, first of all, with placement and holding the flute. What I find when a lot of people come to me in the start as beginners, there's one tendency is to often put the flute actually too high on the lip. And I think the reason for this is partly because it lets you stick out the top lip and sort of avoid the embouchure. So the embouchure, if you've never heard this word before, is just a fancy word basically to describe sort of the shape of the mouth, more specifically the way the muscles will hold the mouth in a particular shape so that we can direct the air into the flute. So when we do this and we develop our embouchure, it makes flute playing much, much easier. We can actually control the air as we're blowing it into the flute, so the tone is easy, and after time, as we develop this, we'll find we can control our intonation, which is the tuning, and we can move freely from our low notes to our high notes. So when we're starting out, again, so instead of placing the flute high up on the lip, we want to think about it as actually coming up nearly from underneath. Now everybody's mouth is a slightly different shape, and everyone's flute is slightly different. So when you're starting out, you're going to have to do a little bit of experimenting yourself. But we all have a mouth, we all have our chin, and we have the space in between. So if we think of this part of our chin nearly as a little shelf, okay, so we're going to actually place the flute on this as a shelf. It's going to come up from underneath. Now that allows the bottom lip to just relax and lay gently over the top of the flute. This is in some ways acting as our lip plate. So if you're used to playing a flute, say with a lip plate, we don't have that on this flute. So we need to actually, it's very important to keep the bottom lip nice and relaxed. Now we're going to cover about 1/3 of the hole. If you cover too much, you're actually blocking the hole so we can't get the air into the flute, making it way too hard. Now, as well, if we're not making any contact with the hole, you're going to find you're blowing all the air up and above, so you're not getting the air into the flute. So again, remember, this is a little shelf, placing the flute here, coming up from underneath, and relaxing the lip over the top of the hole. So the next important point is to keep both the lips nice and relaxed. The tendency sometimes is to want to tighten the lips in the start, sort of pinch them back, but we actually want to keep our lips nice and relaxed and tighten from the sides. Just keep the sides of the mouth nice and firm. So we're going to blow into the flute. Remember, bottom lip nice and relaxed. So straight away, we have a nice tone when we're starting out. So let's try that one more time. So we're going to place the flute on the chin, coming up under the lip. We're going to keep the corners of the mouth nice and firm. It's nearly like if you were biting into something very sour, like a lemon. If you were to bite into a lemon, you would make a funny face and purse your lips. That's sort of the face that we want when we're playing the flute. So keeping the lips relaxed, tightening the corners of the mouth. Let's try that again. Now, for now, actually, I'm going to take all my fingers off and I'm just going to blow into the flute. And that's our basic flute embouchure. Okay, so let's talk about holding the flute. Another mistake or something that I find people do when they're starting out is to actually not be holding the flute nice and solid. So if we think about it here, this is so important. This is making contact with the flute. So if we're kind of holding the flute and the flute is moving, you're changing this all the time, making it very difficult for yourself. So we want good solid contact with the flute when we're playing. So to do this, we have what we say is 3 pressure points. Now this that we already spoke about is number 1. So the flute is sitting in there nice and firm. The next one, now I'm going to teach you the right-handed way for holding the flute. Now, some of you might be different, you might be left-handed players. For some reason, I often find left-handed players play flat fingers and have to compensate by keeping the flute on their shoulder. But if you were to walk into an Irish traditional session with lots of flute players, I'm sure you'd see people in all sorts of contorted positions and funny postures. But for now, we're going to teach you the most correct way to hold the flute. So that's right-handed. So you take your left hand, goes on the top, right hand on the bottom. So this, on the left hand, the first finger, this is like shelf number 2. It's just going to curve around the flute. The flute's going to rest there. So that's pressure point number 2. It's pushing in to your face. And with the chin holding the flute, so they're both directions, it's holding the flute nice and stable. The thumb on the right hand is the third pressure point. So between those 3 points, you can hold the flute nice and stable. Now in reality, we're also probably using our pinky and our thumb to keep the flute nice and stable. So let's try that again with our note. So we're just going to keep all the fingers open, take a nice breath and blow a long note into the flute. Okay, so just if you're having a little bit of trouble with working on the embouchure and getting a sound out of the flute, another thing to keep in mind, this is something I often find as well with people, is they tend to, in the start, want to keep the lips too open. So if the lips are too open, you're losing all of your air. You're not able to direct it so that it's going through the flute. So you should think as if you're blowing nearly through closed lips. So you're just letting the air escape nice and gently through the lips. And so when we're keeping the corners of our mouth firm, it's helping keeping the lips relaxed but closed. So we want as small a hole as possible, really. So the other thing, let's just look at the flute. Now the traditional flute, they come in a few different variations. You can see mine, aside from being fully keyed, so I have the 8 keys on it, it's in really 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. A lot of them will come either with your head joint, your foot joint, and 1 piece in the middle. Also, some flutes will have just the head joint and just 1 piece at the end. So either way, whichever way your flute works, if you're wondering how do I put it together, so here on mine, if you are the same, most flutes will have a tuning slide. So this is your tuning slide. So by pulling it in or out, you can tune the flute. Generally, flutes are made to be in tune if they're about that space. They're not crafted to be in tune like that, because you have nowhere to go if they're out of tune. So generally about that position. So to start off, the best thing to do, I would say, is to line up your hole even with your fingers. And this is where it's up to you as a player to experiment a little bit. Now personally, I turn my head joint in. Some people will turn it out, some people turn it in, some people want to keep it dead straight. This is really up to you as a player. So for me, I turn it in. Okay, so if you're like myself and you have a flute where the middle joint is in 2 pieces, it gives you great flexibility. I personally, this is my preference to have that ability. Although it doesn't matter. For everybody, it doesn't matter, and you actually, your hands will get used to whatever flute you have as well. So for me personally, I turn the bottom joint in ever so slightly toward myself. It's just off center, really a tiny bit. Otherwise, I would keep them more or less lined up straight. Again, for you, if you decide that you feel more comfortable with it turned out, that's totally fine. And you'll see my bottom hand, I actually just have it turned out of the way because these bottom notes, the bottom keys, they're quite loud, so they kind of get in the way. So if I'm not using them, I tend to just turn them out of the way. Okay, so let's proceed on to the fingering. So our flute is in the key of D major. We don't really have to worry about that. We just know that we're playing in D. So our natural scale of the flute is going to be in D major, which means that we're going to have an F sharp. So let's start, first of all, just with the top hand. We're going to start in the mid register, because for most people, when they're starting, the low notes are more difficult or the high notes are more difficult. So let's start in the mid register. It's a nice, easy place to start on the flute. So first finger is down. So we're just covering the top hole with our top finger. Now this is a B. Let's play that together. Now the next note, we're going to add one finger, so we're going to add our A finger. Together and. So the next note, we're going to add the third finger, and that's a G. So moving on the bottom hand, we're going to add the first finger, and that gives us an F sharp. And again, adding the second finger to the bottom hand, and that gives us an E. And finally, we're going to add the last finger of the bottom hand, and that gives us our low D. Now this, for most of us, is going to be our lowest note of the flute. Great. Let's try that again. So we're going to play nice and smoothly through each note, starting from the B, working our way down to the D.